The notion of Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States has sparked considerable debate and speculation. This proposition, while seemingly improbable, raises significant questions about national sovereignty, identity, and the future of US-Canada relations. The potential implications of such a merger are far-reaching, impacting everything from political systems to cultural landscapes. While some dismiss the idea as outlandish, it is crucial to examine the factors that both hinder and perhaps, in some eyes, fuel such a scenario. The historical relationship between Canada and the US is complex, marked by periods of cooperation and tension. The two nations share the world's longest undefended border and are deeply integrated economically. However, Canada has always maintained a distinct national identity, proudly independent of its southern neighbor. The prospect of dissolving this independence and being subsumed by the US is anathema to many Canadians. Understanding the feasibility of such a union requires a nuanced examination of constitutional hurdles, political realities, and the perspectives of all stakeholders involved. Central to this discussion is the concept of consent. For Canada to become part of the US, there must be a clear and unequivocal desire from both populations. Public opinion polls consistently show that Canadians overwhelmingly reject the idea of joining the US. A 2024 poll by the Pew Research Center found that only 12% of Canadians view the US favorably, the lowest point in 2 decades. This lack of popular support presents a significant obstacle to any potential integration, highlighting the deep-seated cultural and political differences between the two nations. Moreover, the potential ramifications of such a union extend far beyond the borders of Canada and the US. The global community would undoubtedly be watching closely, particularly given the current geopolitical climate. The implications for international trade, security alliances, and the balance of power are substantial. It is essential to consider the broader international context when exploring the feasibility of Canada becoming the 51st state, recognizing that this is not simply a bilateral issue, but one with global implications. The integration of Canada into the US would necessitate navigating a labyrinthine web of constitutional hurdles on both sides of the border. These legal frameworks, designed to safeguard national sovereignty and democratic principles, pose significant challenges to any proposed unification. The complexities of amending these constitutions, coupled with the potential for political gridlock, underscore the daunting legal obstacles facing such an endeavor. In Canada, amending the Constitution requires a significant level of consensus among federal and provincial governments. The amending formula, enshrined in the Constitution Act 1982, necessitates the approval of both the House of Commons and the Senate, along with the legislatures of at least 2/3 of the provinces, representing at least 50% of the Canadian population. Given the regional diversity and often divergent interests of Canadian provinces, achieving this level of unanimity on an issue as fundamental as national sovereignty is highly improbable. The U.S. Constitution, while less stringent in its amendment process, still presents significant hurdles. Article 5 outlines 2 pathways for amendment: either a 2/3 vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, followed by ratification by 3/4 of the states, or a constitutional convention, called by 2/3 of the state legislatures. The latter method, while never used successfully, highlights the inherent challenges in altering the foundational document of the United States. The political realities of the U.S. Congress, often characterized by partisan gridlock and ideological divisions, further complicate the prospects of passing an amendment to incorporate Canada. Beyond the formal amendment processes, both countries would face a myriad of legal and logistical challenges in integrating their respective systems of governance. From harmonizing tax codes and social programs to merging military forces and diplomatic corps, the sheer scale of the undertaking is staggering. The legal complexities involved in disentangling 2 distinct legal systems, each with its own body of laws, precedents, and judicial interpretations, should not be underestimated. The process would likely take decades to complete, with no guarantee of success. Any discussion about the future of Canada, including the hypothetical scenario of it becoming the 51st U.S. state, must acknowledge the central role of Indigenous nations. These nations, with their distinct cultures, languages, and histories, predate the existence of both Canada and the United States. Their inherent rights, recognized in international law and increasingly affirmed in domestic legal frameworks, make them essential stakeholders in any conversation about territorial integrity and political change. For centuries, Indigenous peoples in Canada have faced systemic discrimination and assimilation policies. The legacy of residential schools, forced removals from traditional lands, and cultural suppression continues to have a profound impact on Indigenous communities. In recent decades, there has been growing recognition of the need for reconciliation and the affirmation of Indigenous self-determination. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, adopted by Canada in 2010, emphasizes the right of Indigenous peoples to free, prior, and informed consent on matters that affect their lands, territories, and resources. In the context of the hypothetical U.S. annexation of Canada, Indigenous nations would undoubtedly demand to be full participants in any decision-making process. Their consent, based on their own laws and governance structures, would be paramount. Given the historical and ongoing injustices experienced by Indigenous peoples at the hands of both Canada and the U.S., it is highly unlikely that they would readily consent to a political arrangement that could further erode their sovereignty and rights. The potential for widespread Indigenous opposition represents a significant obstacle to any attempt to subsume Canada into the United States. Furthermore, the inclusion of Indigenous perspectives in this debate highlights the importance of moving beyond the narrow confines of a binary choice between Canada and the United States. Indigenous peoples have long advocated for alternative models of governance and land stewardship, based on their own principles of sustainability, reciprocity, and respect for the natural world. Their voices and visions offer valuable insights into imagining a future that transcends the limitations of existing nation-states and embraces a more just and equitable world. The hypothetical scenario of Canada becoming the 51st U.S. state extends far beyond the domestic affairs of these two North American nations. It raises complex questions about international law, diplomatic relations, and the global balance of power. The international community, particularly Canada's allies and trading partners, would undoubtedly have a keen interest in the unfolding events, potentially shaping the response to such an unprecedented geopolitical shift. At the heart of the matter lies the principle of state sovereignty, a cornerstone of international law. This principle, enshrined in the United Nations Charter, guarantees the right of every state to independence and territorial integrity. Any attempt by the United States to annex Canada, whether through military force or political coercion, would be a blatant violation of international law, drawing condemnation from the global community. Canada, for its part, would likely seek support from its allies and international organizations. As a member of the G7, NATO, and the Commonwealth, Canada enjoys strong diplomatic ties with many countries around the world. It could leverage these relationships to rally international pressure against any U.S. aggression or attempts at annexation. However, it is important to acknowledge the asymmetrical power dynamic between Canada and the United States. The U.S., as a global superpower with significant economic and military might, wields considerable influence on the world stage. This disparity in power could limit Canada's options in responding to any U.S. actions that threaten its sovereignty. Moreover, the potential ramifications of such a geopolitical shift extend far beyond North America. The Arctic, for instance, is becoming an increasingly contested region, with implications for resource extraction, shipping routes, and military strategy. Canada's sovereignty over its Arctic territories is crucial for maintaining stability in the region. Any attempt by the U.S. to absorb Canada would inevitably raise questions about the future of the Arctic, and could lead to increased tensions with other Arctic nations, including Russia and China. The international community would need to carefully navigate these complex geopolitical considerations to prevent escalation and maintain global security.